On the morning of December 8, 1990, Navy radio man Jeffrey Anzaldi woke at 7:30 in his San Diego home. His 14-month-old daughter, Crystal Leanne, was asleep between him and his wife. He pulled a blanket over her and closed his eyes. 30 minutes later, she was gone. No forced entry, no noise, no witnesses. How does a baby disappear from between two sleeping parents in half an hour and remain unseen for 7 years inside U.S. territory? If you're listening along today, tell us where you're joining from. San Diego in 1990 was a military city home to Naval Base Coronado, and thousands of young service families like the Anzaldas, transient, underpaid, far from extended family support networks. But the Golden Hill neighborhood where Crystal disappeared wasn't the sun-drenched tourist San Diego of postcards. It was a working-class area struggling with the methamphetamine epidemic sweeping California, a place where neighbors described constant foot traffic, unfamiliar cars, people coming and going at all hours. The Anzaldas lived on the bottom floor of a two-story house with multiple access points, a front door, a back door, and an internal staircase to an upstairs apartment occupied by others. Privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford. The year 1990 meant no cell phones, no internet databases, no Amber Alert system that wouldn't exist for another 6 years, no doorbell cameras. A missing child meant physical posters, local news broadcasts, and hoping someone happened to see something. December in San Diego meant mild temperatures, maybe 60 degrees at dawn. The kind of morning where windows might be left open, where sound carried, where a baby's cry should have been heard. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Luquillo, Puerto Rico was a small coastal municipality on the island's eastern edge, lush, Spanish-speaking tight-knit communities where everyone knew their neighbor's business, or thought they did. Puerto Rico's status as a U.S. territory meant residents could travel freely to the mainland, but vital statistics operated on separate systems, a crack in the bureaucracy wide enough to hide a stolen child. Jeffrey Anzaldi was baby-faced and earnest, the kind of guy who double-checked the blanket on his sleeping daughter before catching a few more minutes of rest himself. Dorothy Anzaldi, 8 years older than her husband, was a CB radio enthusiast with a complicated past. She'd experimented with drugs in her friend circle, marijuana and methamphetamine and cocaine. Not an addict, she'd insist, just did it a few times like everybody. The age gap and lifestyle differences had already created friction in the marriage. 3-year-old Kendra Joyce, Crystal's older sister, slept in the same bed that morning, blonde and watchful, too young to remember details but old enough to feel the terror when the helicopters came. Crystal Leanne, 14 months old, was chubby and sandy-haired, just learning to walk. A baby who still needed diapers and blankets pulled up by protective fathers. Dorothy called her "my miracle baby" after a difficult emergency C-section delivery. They were a family that slept together for warmth and closeness in a dangerous neighborhood. "We're a team," Jeffrey would say, "all 4 of them against the world." That Saturday morning started like dozens before it, a young father checking on his sleeping daughter, a mother exhausted from the demands of 2 babies under 4, a modest home in a neighborhood where you locked your doors and trusted your instincts. It was the last ordinary morning the Anzaldi family would ever have, because somewhere in that 30-minute window between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, someone walked into their home and took their child. And for 7 years, absolutely no one would know where she went. The house was quiet except for breathing. Jeffrey, Dorothy, 3-year-old Kendra, and 14-month-old Crystal all shared one bed, a common arrangement for families living paycheck to paycheck, and a security measure in a neighborhood they didn't fully trust. Crystal wore only a blue diaper. The December morning was mild enough that a blanket was sufficient. She was at that chubby-cheeked toddler stage, sandy brown hair, just beginning to walk but not yet talking in full sentences. Jeffrey woke naturally around 7:30, saw Crystal sleeping peacefully between him and Dorothy, pulled a blanket up to cover her more fully, a tender automatic gesture of fatherhood. He noticed nothing unusual, no sounds from elsewhere in the house, no open doors, no signs of anyone else awake. That blanket pull would be the last time he touched his daughter. The mundane act would replay in his mind, thousands of times, searching for what he might have missed. Jeffrey drifted back to sleep. Dorothy slept through it all. Kendra slept. It was a Saturday. No rush to be anywhere. For 30 minutes, no one in the household was awake. No sounds were reported. No neighbors saw anything. This was when Crystal disappeared. But how? Through which door? Carried by whom? In what? At 8 o'clock, Jeffrey woke again. Immediately noticed Crystal gone from between him and Dorothy. First thought maybe she crawled somewhere. 14-month-olds can move, but not far, not quietly. He checked the immediate room, looked in corners under furniture, checked the small bathroom. Growing concern, not yet panic. Then Jeffrey noticed the front door was ajar. The door leading to the upstairs apartment was also ajar. Both should have been secured. This was the first concrete sign. Not an accident. An intrusion. "Where's Crystal?" he asked, shaking Dorothy awake. She bolted upright, began running room to room. "Crystal! Crystal!" Her voice rising, becoming screams. She ran outside around the block, yelling her daughter's name, looking in yards and alleys. Neighbors started emerging from homes drawn by a mother's terror. Police were called. Report 14-month-old missing from home. Baby wearing only a diaper. Been missing approximately 30 minutes. No signs of forced entry, but doors found open. What we know is limited. A 30-minute maximum window, possibly shorter, perhaps only 15 or 20 minutes. All family members asleep. The house occupied by multiple people, the landlord's 3 children, somewhere in the dwelling, their various fathers coming and going. Technically, both parents were supervising, but they were asleep in a locked home with a reasonable expectation of safety. The household had multiple adults, multiple children, people coming and going regularly. The house was in a drug-active neighborhood where strangers were not unusual. Multiple entry points created vulnerability. On a quiet Saturday morning, with everyone sleeping in, opportunity presented itself to someone. Jeffrey's eyes opening at 8 o'clock brought the instant recognition that something was wrong. A parent knows when their child isn't where they should be. The bed felt different, sounded different. Crystal's absence was palpable before it was visual. The gap between her small body and his was cold. Dorothy ran through the house first, then around the block. Neighbors emerged to help, checking their own yards, garages, garbage bins. Within an hour, the search had expanded to encompass the entire neighborhood. By the time the first police car arrived, Crystal had been missing for perhaps 45 minutes. Officers expected to find her quickly. Toddlers don't go far. They hide in closets or crawl under beds or toddle to a neighbor's yard. But as the morning turned to afternoon and the afternoon to evening, and search dogs found no scent trail beyond the front door, and helicopters circled overhead, blaring "Baby in Diapers," missing a terrible truth began to settle over Golden Hill. Crystal Anzaldi hadn't wandered away. Someone had taken her. And that someone had vanished as completely as the child herself. San Diego Police Department took the lead. Sergeant Jim Munsterman became the primary investigator, immediately treating this as a stranger abduction given the circumstances. No forced entry complicated the profile. The FBI was brought in within hours, standard protocol for child abductions, bringing resources for interstate possibilities and access to the National Crime Information Center database. Dozens of neighbors arrived within the first hour. By afternoon, hundreds of volunteers had been organized into grid search teams. Neighbors who'd watched Crystal grow, other Navy families from the base, community members horrified by a baby abduction, police officers on and off duty, all searching. Helicopters flew low over Golden Hill, loudspeakers blaring that surreal, terrifying announcement. Baby in diapers missing. Neighbors say that sound haunted them for years. K-9 units were given Crystal's clothing to track her scent. The dogs tracked to the front door, then lost the trail. An indication she was carried out, likely in a vehicle. No trail to follow beyond the threshold. Every yard, every alley, every garage was searched. They checked garbage bins, a horrifying but necessary task. They looked in cars, under porches, in bushes. The radius expanded block by block. Officers went door to door, interviewing every resident, with particular focus on anyone seen carrying babies. They were looking for strangers, unusual vehicles, trying to create a timeline of neighborhood activity. Golden Hill was thoroughly searched. The radius expanded to several miles by day's end. Nearby parks, waterways, construction sites, any location a child could be hidden. They found nothing. No discarded diaper, no blanket, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no physical evidence. Local San Diego news stations covered the story intensively. Crystal's photo was distributed widely. The parents made tearful appeals on camera. Missing person posters were printed and distributed. "Have you seen this baby?" became the question everyone asked. The crime scene revealed frustratingly little. Entry point unknown. Both the front door and upstairs door found ajar, but which was used for entry, for exit both. There was no forced entry, no broken locks, no jimmied windows, no tool marks, no signs of struggle. No overturned furniture, no items knocked over, no indication Crystal cried or fought. No ransom note, nothing left behind to indicate motive or identity. The house had dozens of fingerprints. Multiple adults and children lived there or visited regularly. Isolating unknown prints proved impossible. DNA technology in 1990 was limited compared to today. No hair or fiber evidence could be isolated as belonging to an intruder. The blanket Jeffrey had pulled over, Crystal was never found. None of Crystal's belongings were taken. No clothes missing, no toys, no bottles. Despite dozens of people coming and going from that house regularly, no one saw anything unusual that morning. The search dog results told a professional story. Scent trail to the front door only. Someone had carried Crystal out. No trail suggesting she walked or was dragged. Quick, efficient abduction. Every neighbor within a 3-block radius was questioned. Regular visitors to the Anzaldi house were interviewed multiple times. The landlord's 3 children and their various fathers were tracked down and questioned. People known to frequent the house for drug activity were brought in. Bob Underwood, a 25-year neighborhood resident, described constant strangers coming and going from the house confirmed drug activity, but saw nothing unusual the morning of December 8th. Other neighbors reported seeing the usual traffic of people, but no one carrying a baby, no unfamiliar vehicles. Not a single person reported seeing anyone enter or leave the Anzaldi home between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. Investigators tried to map who was where in the neighborhood. Drug users were often up at odd hours. Shouldn't someone have seen something? The silence was deafening. Standard protocol in child disappearances meant the parents became initial suspects. Dorothy's history of drug use raised red flags. Neighborhood drug activity created suspicion of a debt or revenge scenario. A young couple under financial stress. Could this be something darker? Both consistently denied any involvement. They took polygraphs. They submitted to repeated questioning. Jeffrey's military background was checked, but both parents' grief appeared genuine. There was no evidence of harm to Crystal before her disappearance. No financial motive was found. Their alibi was solid. Both were asleep in bed with witnesses, each other, and Kendra. Despite intense investigation, despite interviewing hundreds of people, despite tracking down everyone known to frequent the house, no other suspects emerged. The perpetrator had left no trace. The search expanded to the entire San Diego area during days 2 and 3. Waterways were dragged, a horrifying necessity. All registered offenders in the area were questioned. An FBI profiler was brought in to assess the abduction type. By days 4 through 7, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created a profile for Crystal. Age progression photos were prepared. Details entered included 14 months old sandy brown hair, chubby, and one crucial detail, a tiny birthmark to the left of her nose. That birthmark would prove crucial 7 years later. Media coverage intensified. National news picked up the story. Navy baby kidnapped from bed became the headline. Public sympathy was enormous. Tips flooded in. Hundreds of calls to the police hotline. Reported sightings from across California. Each was followed up. Each led nowhere. Jeffrey and Dorothy appeared on camera repeatedly begging for Crystal's return. Just bring her back, no questions asked, they pleaded. Dorothy's anguished words echoed through the investigation. I'm not leaving any stone unturned. The community responded with fundraising for reward money, continued volunteer search efforts, prayer vigils, neighborhood watch groups. But beneath all the activity lay the frustrating reality. No solid leads, no credible suspects, no ransom demands. Just a baby who'd vanished like smoke. Our community knows this fear. We've all heard the helicopter overhead, seen the search parties forming, watched parents age a decade in a day. We know that the first 24 hours are critical, that hope and dread battle in every searcher's heart. We know the volunteers checking garbage bins are imagining the worst while praying for the best. And we know that when a baby vanishes from her bed with no trace, no motive, no witnesses, it violates everything we believe about safety and order. Because if it can happen to Crystal Anzaldi in her own home with her parents sleeping beside her, it can happen to anyone. By the end of the first week, Sergeant Jim Munsterman had interviewed hundreds of people, followed dozens of leads, and coordinated searches covering hundreds of square miles. He had exactly zero concrete evidence about who took Crystal Anzaldi or where she'd gone. The case file grew thicker, but the answers remained elusive. As December turned to January, the media cameras moved on to other stories. The volunteers returned to their lives. The tips slowed to a trickle, and in a small coastal town in Puerto Rico, 3,000 miles away, a woman named Nilza Girbellini was settling into life with a sandy-haired baby girl she would call Sonia. January 1991. The investigation was still technically active, but losing momentum. The FBI reassigned agents to other cases. Local police reduced daily manpower. Sergeant Munsterman kept the file on his desk. Tips dropped to 2 or 3 per week, mostly false sightings. Jeffrey returned to Navy duties because he had to work. Dorothy struggled with devastating grief and guilt. I was sleeping right there, she would think. 3-year-old Kendra kept asking where Crystal was. The strain on the marriage intensified. By spring, the case was officially moved to cold status. No active daily investigation remained. The file stayed open, reviewed periodically. The NCMEC profile stayed active in their database. Jeffrey and Dorothy's marriage was crumbling under pressure. Drug activity in the neighborhood continued. They needed to leave. But arguments erupted about whether to move. What if Crystal comes back? The blame neither would say aloud hung between them. You were sleeping too. December 8, 1991 marked the first terrible anniversary. 1 year without Crystal. Local news did a brief follow-up story. Still, no leads in Navy baby disappearance. Jeffrey and Dorothy went through the motions. On October 10th, Crystal's second birthday, she would be 2 years old. Dorothy baked a cake anyway, placed it in the empty bedroom. Candles for a ghost. Kendra didn't understand why they were celebrating. Divorce proceedings began. The marriage could not survive the loss. Too much pain, too many unspoken accusations. Custody battle over Kendra. Dorothy didn't show up to court. Jeffrey was awarded custody of their remaining daughter. Jeffrey moved to Banks, Oregon with Kendra in 1992. He left the Navy, tried to start over. Crystal's bedroom furniture went into storage. He wouldn't throw anything away. What if she comes back? Dorothy moved to Corning, California, trying to outrun grief that couldn't be outrun. The accident that took Crystal happened on her watch too. She carried guilt like stones. Sergeant Munsterman checked the file monthly. He followed up on occasional tips. All led nowhere. We're no closer than we were in 1990, he would later say. But he never closed the file. By 1994 and 95, Jeffrey met Nicole and remarried. They had a daughter, Miranda. A new family formed, but Crystal's absence was always there. Kendra was growing up. Her memories of her baby sister were fading. Crystal's milestones passed unmarked. First day of kindergarten she'd never have. Lost teeth school plays birthday parties. Jeffrey imagined her at each age. She'd be starting school now. What does she look like? The terrible math haunted him. Crystal was abducted at 14 months. Now she'd be 5, 6 years old. More years gone than she was alive. Memory fading. Did Jeffrey still remember her baby smell, the Golden Hill neighborhood barely remembered by 1996? Other families had moved in and out. Other tragedies had occurred. Crystal Anzaldi was becoming a footnote, but the file remained in San Diego Police Department cold case storage and in the NCMEC database. Photos showed what Crystal might look like now. That tiny birthmark to the left of her nose remained noted in her description. Her distinctive smile was captured in baby photos. Technology was evolving. 1996 brought widespread internet access. NCMEC launched their website. Digital databases became searchable. Photos could be compared electronically. No one knew yet how this would change everything. Jeffrey developed a routine. He checked missing children websites periodically. He called Sergeant Munsterman every few months. Anything new, he'd ask. Sorry, Jeff. Nothing came the reply. He'd hang up and return to his Oregon life. Dorothy, engaged to be married again, was trying to move forward. But Crystal's birthday, the anniversary Christmas these days, pinned her in place. The miracle baby was still gone. Our community knows what happens when a case goes cold. The dedicated detective moves on to fresh cases where evidence trails are still warm. The family learns to carry the weight of not knowing like a stone in their pocket, always there, sometimes forgotten for an hour, then remembered with crushing force. Birthdays become memorials, holidays become minefields, and the terrible question, should I keep hoping or start grieving, has no answer. Our community understands that hope is both gift and curse. For Jeffrey Anzaldi, in Oregon, hope meant keeping Crystal's file active, meant checking missing children websites, meant believing that somewhere his daughter was still alive. For Dorothy in California, hope meant the miracle baby could still be a miracle. And for Sergeant Jim Munsterman in San Diego, hope meant refusing to mark the case unsolved and file it away forever. None of them knew that hope was justified, that Crystal was indeed alive, growing up as someone else 3,000 miles away. Then in March 1997, 7 years after Crystal vanished from her San Diego bedroom, a Puerto Rican social worker received a routine complaint about possible child neglect in the small coastal town of Luquillo. The social worker had no idea she was about to stumble into one of the FBI's most baffling cold cases. No idea that the 8-year-old girl she was investigating, the one who spoke only Spanish, who answered to the name Sonia Guzman, who said evening prayers with her mother, was actually a Navy baby from California who'd been missing since she was 14 months old. The breakthrough wouldn't come from detective work or new forensic technology. It would come from a bureaucrat checking a birth certificate. March 1997, Puerto Rico Department of Family Services, San Juan. The complaint came in like hundreds of others. Possible child neglect, possible abuse. An 8-year-old girl named Sonia Guzman living in Luquillo with her mother Nilza Girbolini Guzman. The caller later revealed to be the mother's soon-to-be ex-husband. Marshall Chamblin reported that the woman was drinking heavily, screaming at the child, pulling her by her hair. Social worker Carmen Moreno took the case. Standard protocol meant visiting the home, interviewing the child, verifying living conditions, and critically verifying documentation. When Moreno requested Sonia's birth certificate that summer, Girbolini provided it without hesitation. A Puerto Rican birth certificate claiming the child was born on the island in 1989, biological daughter of Nilza Girbolini Guzman. But something felt off. Moreno had been doing this work for 15 years. She'd developed instincts. She sent the certificate to the Justice Department for verification. By late summer, the results came back. The certificate was fraudulent, a skilled forgery but fake nonetheless. The case transformed instantly. Not just neglect, but potential child trafficking, potential kidnapping. Director of Special Investigations, Anibal Torres Rivera, took over, bringing in Interpol Puerto Rico. When confronted, Girbolini's story fell apart quickly. She claimed a friend had left the child with her years ago because the biological mother had passed away. She'd adopted her informally. She loved her like her own daughter. On October 28, 1997, mandatory testing proved what everyone now suspected. The blood test results came back definitive. Nilza Girbolini Guzman could not be this child's biological mother. So, who was she? The next day, Agent Ismael Cintrón sat at his computer in the Interpol office. His job was to search missing children databases for girls approximately age 8, possibly from the United States, who'd gone missing years ago. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had recently launched their website. Revolutionary technology, searchable photos, detailed descriptions, interstate coordination. Cintrón began scrolling, one photo, another, 500 photos in. He stopped. A baby with a distinctive smile. A smile that looked achingly familiar. The file read Crystal Leanne Anzaldi, missing from San Diego, California, December 8, 1990. Age at disappearance 14 months. Physical description included one crucial detail. Tiny birthmark to the left of nose. Cintrón called the foster home. Asked to see the child. Examined her face closely. There to the left of her nose was a tiny birthmark. The smile, even at 8 years old, was the same smile. Everybody here was like they had hit the lottery, Torres Rivera would later say. Cintrón immediately contacted San Diego Police Department and Sergeant Jim Munsterman, along with the FBI San Diego office and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Munsterman couldn't believe it. 7 years, no leads. And now this. Original reports from December 8, 1990, were pulled from storage. Photos of infant Crystal were compared to current photos of Sonia. The distinctive smile matched across 7 years of aging. The birthmark documented in the original file was visible on the current child. Jeffrey and Dorothy's description of their daughter aligned perfectly. Timeline checks revealed critical connections. Girbolini had been living in San Diego in December 1990. She'd left San Diego on December 21, 1990, 13 days after Crystal disappeared. Her husband at the time, Darrell Graham, a Navy man, confirmed she'd shown up with a baby, claiming she'd given birth. Graham knew he wasn't the father. He was away at sea during the supposed pregnancy. He'd put her on a plane to Puerto Rico to be rid of them both. The pieces were fitting together. Ghirbolini knew people who frequented the Anzaldi house. She had opportunity in that chaotic household with drug traffic and multiple entry points. She had means and access to the neighborhood. The method of how she entered the house and took Crystal remained unknown. How she transported an infant to Puerto Rico without papers was still unclear. In interviews, Ghirbolini maintained her story. A friend left the baby with her. She didn't know the baby was missing. She'd raised Sonia out of love. She would not explain exactly how the child came into her possession. Her lawyers advised silence on details. DNA testing was ordered in November. The visual match was compelling, but courts needed scientific proof. Blood samples were drawn from the child in Puerto Rico, from Jeffrey Anzaldi in Oregon, from Dorothy Anzaldi in California. They were sent to a forensic lab for comparison. While waiting for DNA results, Interpol agents interviewed Ghirbolini's acquaintances in Puerto Rico. All confirmed she'd arrived in December 1990 with an infant. All confirmed she'd told everyone the baby was hers. Some neighbors thought it strange because they hadn't seen her pregnant, but they accepted her explanation that she'd given birth on the mainland. San Diego investigators re-interviewed people from 1990 trying to place Ghirbolini at the Anzaldi house the morning of December 8th. No one could definitively confirm her presence, but the connection between her and people who frequented the house was established. Arrest warrants were obtained for fraud charges related to the birth certificate. Search warrants were issued for any documentation of the child's arrival in Puerto Rico. The team assembled included Interpol Puerto Rico leading local action, San Diego Police Department preparing for potential proceedings, and the FBI coordinating interstate elements. Prosecutors in both jurisdictions consulted on charges. The DNA results would take 2 weeks. The child, called Sonia, remained in foster care, confused and scared. Jeffrey and Dorothy were notified. Your daughter might be alive. After 7 years of grief, now came terrifying hope. Once DNA confirmed, identity officials planned to immediately notify biological parents, arrange for the child's transition out of Puerto Rico, and prepare for a custody hearing. Who would get her? The father in Oregon or the mother in California? They would need to manage media because this would become a huge story. On November 14, 1997, the DNA results arrived. The match was confirmed. 99.9% certainty. This was Crystal Leanne Anzaldi. On November 17th, a public announcement was planned. Our community has learned that truth has its own timeline. Persistence matters. Sergeant Munsterman, keeping that file active for 7 years mattered. Technology matters. The NCMEC website that Agent Cintrone scrolled through mattered. Tiny details matter. A distinctive smile, a birthmark the size of a pencil eraser. And sometimes justice arrives not through brilliant detective work, but through bureaucratic accident. A social worker checking a birth certificate, a routine verification that unraveled 7 years of lies. The answer was always there, hiding in plain sight within U.S. territory, waiting for someone to look closely enough. On November 17, 1997, FBI spokesperson Jan Caldwell stood before cameras in San Diego and made an announcement that would make national headlines. We are thrilled to report that Crystal Leanne Anzaldi has been found alive in Puerto Rico. 3,000 miles away in a foster home in San Juan, an 8-year-old girl who spoke only Spanish sat with a translator trying to understand what the social worker was telling her, that her name was not Sonia, that her mother was not her mother, that somewhere in America, people called her parents were crying with joy to learn she existed. The girl listened, confused and terrified, and asked the question that would haunt everyone. Where are my mother and father? I want to see them. But which mother did she mean? Before DNA confirmation, when investigators first confronted Ghirbolini with the fraudulent birth certificate, she maintained her composure. She was 35 years old, with mid-length dyed blonde hair and soft brown eyes, the kind of woman who'd worked as a bartender and waitress who neighbors described as loving toward the little girl. Her story remained consistent. A friend left the baby with her. The biological mother had passed. She raised the child out of love. But when blood tests proved she wasn't the biological mother, the questions intensified. Multiple warrants were issued in October 1997. for violating a restraining order to stay away from ex-husband Chamblin, failure to appear in court for child abuse allegations, and falsifying documents related to the Axis Nation birth certificate. Girbolini was taken to Vega Alta Women's Prison. According to her lawyer's statements to Puerto Rican tabloids, she maintained she had done nothing wrong. She had saved this child. She loved Sonia as her own daughter. She wanted custody. The delusion, or the lie, was complete. By November, when DNA results confirmed Crystal's identity, she'd already been in foster care for months due to abuse allegations against Girbolini. The 8-year-old had sandy brown hair now longer. She still had that distinctive smile when she felt safe. She still had the tiny birthmark to the left of her nose. She was healthy physically despite neglect allegations, though small for her age. The Puerto Rican Department of Family Office became the setting for one of the most difficult conversations imaginable. Sterile and bureaucratic, with toys in the corner that no child actually played with, windows overlooking San Juan traffic, air conditioning, humming, the smell of coffee, and copy machines filling the air. Social workers and psychologists prepared carefully. They brought in a Spanish translator. They showed her photos of herself as a baby, photos of a family she didn't know. "This is you," they explained gently, "when you were very small." The girl looked at the chubby baby in the pictures, confused. "Your name is Crystal Leanne Anzaldi." She shook her head. "No, Sonia. The woman you knew as your mother, she took you from your real family when you were very small." According to Torres Rivera, she was questioning my agent like an attorney. "How did you find my picture? How did you realize that was me? Where's my mother and father? I want to see them." But she meant Girbolini. She wanted the woman she knew as mother, even though that woman had screamed at her, pulled her hair, frightened her. 7 years of socialization don't disappear with a DNA test. The medical examination on November 14th showed generally healthy condition despite neglect allegations. No signs of severe physical abuse. Some indicators of malnutrition explained why she was small for her age. Dental work was needed. Psychologically significant trauma assessment would be required. The child believed her name was Sonia Guzman. She spoke only Spanish fluently, understanding perhaps 10 or 20 words of English absorbed from her environment. She had no memory of California San Diego parents or her sister. Total linguistic and cultural replacement had been achieved. Her attachment to Girbolini, despite abuse, was evident. She would require extensive therapy for identity integration. The identity confirmation markers were irrefutable. The birthmark matched exactly as described in the 1990 missing person report. The smile was distinctive and recognizable across 7 years. Facial structure matched age progression models from NCMEC. DNA provided irrefutable scientific proof. On November 17, 1997, the official declaration was made. Crystal Leanne Anzaldi, missing since December 8, 1990, has been found alive. Both Jeffrey and Dorothy were contacted by phone before the public announcement. Jeffrey's reaction from Banks, Oregon was immediate joy. "My Christmas and Thanksgiving all in one," he said. But immediate complication followed. He was remarried. He had custody of Kendra, now 10 years old. He had a new baby daughter, Miranda, who was 14 months old, eerily the same age Crystal had been when taken. His new wife, Nicole, would have to help integrate a traumatized Spanish-speaking 8-year-old into their Oregon home. Dorothy's reaction from Corning, California came while she was still recovering from a devastating car accident. Over 100 stitches, broken ribs, punctured lung, shattered bones. She believed God had spared her life so she could hold her miracle baby again. She immediately declared intention to seek custody. "I'm willing to work the rest of my life to rebuild that bond," she said. But Crystal wasn't coming home immediately. Puerto Rican courts had jurisdiction. On December 23, 1997, Girbolini posted bail. Interpol's immediate response was to double security at the foster home. Agent Ismael Cintrón explained, "They increased the number of agents specifically to shield the child from the woman she had known as her mother. The fear was real. Girbolini might try to see Sonia or even attempt to take her again." Jeffrey and Dorothy were not immediately allowed to fly to Puerto Rico. Legal process had to unfold. A custody hearing was required. Child welfare assessment was needed. Psychological preparation was essential. Translation and cultural transition had to be planned. 3 parties filed for custody: Jeffrey Anzaldi, biological father in Oregon; Dorothy Anzaldi, biological mother in California, and Ghirbolini's lawyers arguing she was the only mother Crystal knew. Judge Lilia Ortiz Puig faced an impossible decision. What serves the best interest of a child who doesn't know she's been stolen? On January 30th, 1998, Ghirbolini was flown to San Diego under guard to testify before a federal grand jury. She faced questions about how she obtained this child, where she got her, who gave her to the baby, whether she took Crystal from the Anzaldi home. Her testimony maintained the same story. A friend left the baby with her. The friend claimed the biological mother had passed. She admitted creating a fraudulent birth certificate to enroll Sonia in school and access health care, but she would not admit to physically taking Crystal from the San Diego house. The evidentiary problem was severe. No witnesses placed her at the Anzaldi home on December 8, 1990. No physical evidence linked her to the abduction. 7 years had passed. Memories faded. People moved. Her connection to people who frequented the house was established, but not her presence that morning. The motive was never clearly established. Possible theories included wanting a child she couldn't have, seeing opportunity in a chaotic household, mental illness or delusion, or simple criminal opportunism. She never gave a coherent explanation. Prosecutors faced a dilemma. They could prove fraud. They could prove she possessed a kidnapped child. They could not definitively prove she personally committed the kidnapping. In February 1998, Judge Ortiz Puig issued her custody ruling. Arguments for Jeffrey included that he was the biological father, with established custody of the older sister. He had a stable home in Oregon. He was married, with additional support from wife Nicole, and the presence of Kendra would provide sibling connection that could help Crystal reconnect with her original identity. Arguments for Dorothy centered on biological mother status, maternal bond claims, and intense desire to rebuild the relationship. She was willing to work the rest of her life to recover the connection. Arguments for Ghirbolini focused on being the only mother. Crystal consciously remembered the psychological trauma of complete separation and the child's stated preference, since she called for Ghirbolini along with 7 years of attachment, however toxic. The judge's reasoning focused on best interest of the child. Stability was crucial for trauma recovery. The sibling bond with Kendra could anchor identity. The father's home was established and evaluated. The mother's recent accident and recovery complicated immediate placement. Ghirbolini's claims were legally untenable. Fraud and possible kidnapping disqualified her. Custody was awarded to Jeffrey Anzaldi with conditions. Dorothy was granted visitation rights. Psychological services were mandated. English language instruction was required. Cultural transition support was ordered. Regular welfare checks were scheduled for the first year. The practical reality meant Crystal would leave Puerto Rico, the only home she remembered. She would leave a Spanish-speaking environment for English. She would leave the tropical Caribbean for Oregon winter. She would meet a father, stepmother, and sisters she didn't know. She would be called a name she didn't recognize. The happy ending was actually the beginning of the hardest part. In February 1998, Ghirbolini faced multiple charges in Puerto Rico court, submitting a fraudulent birth certificate, falsifying official documents, psychological abuse of a minor. Rather than fight all charges, prosecutors offered a deal. Plead guilty to submitting a phony birth certificate. Accept a guilty finding on falsifying documents. The sentence was 1 year in prison. The kidnapping charge was never filed. Why? Insufficient evidence proved she personally took Crystal from the San Diego house. No witnesses placed her at the scene. Her defense, that someone gave her the baby, created reasonable doubt about the actual moment of abduction. Public reaction was outrage. 1 year for stealing 7 years of a child's life. FBI spokespersons in San Diego expressed frustration but acknowledged evidentiary limitations. Sergeant Munsterman noted that the murky circumstances of the original disappearance, no witnesses, no physical evidence, made the kidnapping charge impossible to prove beyond reasonable doubt. Ghirbolini's final statement, delivered via her lawyer, maintained she'd raised Sonia out of love. She claimed she'd saved the child from a bad situation. She expressed no remorse for the identity theft. She claimed she was the victim of overzealous investigation. She served 1 year in Vega Alta Women's Prison and was released in 1999. Afterward, she disappeared from public record. Her current whereabouts remain unknown. Jeffrey would later say, "She stole my daughter's childhood and got a year in prison." If she'd stolen my car, she'd have gotten more time. Dorothy was too devastated to comment publicly. Crystal wouldn't learn about the sentencing details until years later. When she did, her response was simple. Ghiberlini meant absolutely nothing to her, not worth the emotional energy to be angry. In February 1998, 8-year-old Crystal Leanne Anzaldi, who still thought her name was Sonia Guzman and spoke no English, boarded a plane from San Juan to Portland. Waiting at the airport was a man she'd been told was her father, a woman who was her new mother, and a 10-year-old girl who was apparently her sister. They called her Crystal. She didn't respond. When they spoke to her in English, she stared blankly. When her father tried to hug her, she pulled away. Finding Crystal had taken 7 years, and the combined efforts of multiple law enforcement agencies, but the real work bringing her home psychologically was only just beginning. And justice in a courtroom, it would turn out, would prove far simpler than justice in a stolen child's heart. Crystal arrived in Oregon, speaking no functional English. Jeffrey immediately enrolled her in classes for second-language learners. But language is more than words, it's identity. When the family called Crystal, she wouldn't turn around, didn't recognize the name. She only responded to Sonia. Imagine being 8 years old. Everyone suddenly calls you by a different name. Insists your name isn't what you've answered to your entire conscious life. It felt like the world was crazy, not her. Teachers were instructed to use Crystal but had to call her Sonia to get her attention, then redirect. She had no memory of San Diego, of being a baby called Crystal, of Jeffrey, or Dorothy, of Kendra, who was there when she was taken, of the English language of American culture outside Puerto Rico. She remembered Puerto Rico being Sonia speaking Spanish, Ghiberlini, however complicated that relationship was. The first months brought small victories. She began understanding English before speaking it. A tentative bond was forming with Kendra as sisters sleeping in the same room. Stepmother Nicole's patience became crucial. She was the primary caregiver. Crystal started regular school in fall 1998 with support. But setbacks came too. Nightmares interrupted sleep. She cried for Mama, meaning Ghiberlini. Confusion about why she was in Oregon persisted. Well-meaning strangers recognized her from news coverage. "You're that kidnapped girl," they'd say. Crystal's own words, spoken years later, described people seeing her through a lens of pity. Constant questions followed her. "Do you remember being kidnapped? Are you happy to be home? Do you remember your real parents?" She found it intrusive, detrimental to living a normal life. Crystal estimates it took 2 to 3 years before she truly accepted her identity as Crystal Anzaldi. Not a sudden switch, but a gradual erosion of Sonia and integration of Crystal. English became her dominant language while Spanish faded. Memories of Puerto Rico became dreamlike. Acceptance grew that Jeffrey was her father, not a stranger. Understanding the kidnapping came intellectually, if not emotionally. She can't pinpoint exactly when, but somewhere around age 10 or 11 she began to feel like Crystal instead of Sonia wearing Crystal's name. What helped most was her father Jeffrey being patient and not forcing memories or affection. Stepmother Nikki provided stability without trying to replace anyone. Being given space was the crucial element. No cameras, no reporters, no constant retelling. Peace and silence away from the media spotlight allowed healing. What didn't help was reporters wanting updates on the kidnapped Navy baby, true crime shows requesting interviews, and strangers' pity with invasive questions. The Anzaldi household in Oregon became a blended family. Jeffrey and Nicole, Kendra, now a teenager. Crystal recovering, Miranda growing up. Some things couldn't be recovered. Crystal's first words, whatever they were in English. Her first steps that parents didn't witness. 7 years of birthday parties, Christmases, ordinary moments. The baby Jeffrey, covered with a blanket on December 8, 1990, was gone. The sister Kendra barely remembered had been replaced by someone new. But some things were rebuilt. A functional family unit formed, if not a normal one. Trust between Crystal and Jeffrey grew over years. Sibling bonds with Kendra and Miranda developed. Sense of safety and stability took root. Crystal's education and future became possible. Dorothy's role remained unclear from available records. How much contact she had with Crystal after custody was awarded to Jeffrey. Whether regular visits occurred, what relationship, if any, developed, all remained private. December 8th was always hard. The day she was taken haunted them. October 10th, her birthday, gradually became celebration instead of mourning. But the family learned that recovered doesn't mean undamaged. Healed doesn't mean without scars. Our community understands that happy endings are more complicated than movies suggest. Crystal came home, but home was a place she'd never been. She was reunited with parents who were strangers. She had to grieve the loss of her kidnapper, the only mother she remembered, while accepting that woman had stolen her life. Recovery wasn't a destination reached in weeks or months. It was a journey measured in years, marked by small victories. The first day, she answered to Crystal without hesitation. The first time she called Jeffrey Dad and meant it. The first birthday she felt truly belonged to her. By 2011, 14 years after her recovery, Crystal Anzaldi had built a life that was undeniably her own. She was a student at Portland Community College, studying art with a focus on landscapes. She admired the work of Edgar Degas. She lived with her boyfriend Jake. She had pets, a cat named Jack and a turtle named Lola. She lived quietly, deliberately out of the spotlight. Her relationship with the past was clear. Nilsa Girbellini meant absolutely nothing to her. No desire for contact or reconciliation existed. Total rejection of the woman who took her required no emotional energy to maintain. She credited Jeffrey and Nikki with her recovery. She needed peace and silence to heal, and she got it. Jeffrey remained in Oregon, their relationship strong. The outcome of any relationship with Dorothy was unclear. Kendra had become an adult. Her relationship with Crystal remained private. Crystal built her own family with Jake. The kidnapped baby became a normal young woman, living the ordinary life she was always meant to have. The question that haunted her case, how someone vanishes in 30 minutes and hides for 7 years, had never been fully answered. And the woman who could tell that story was somewhere out there free, having served only 1 year for stealing a childhood. Whether justice had been served was a question that depended on who you asked. But whether Crystal had survived and ultimately thrived, that answer became clearer with each year that passed. Crystal's case proved the value of internet-accessible missing children databases. Agent Cintrone's ability to scroll through photos online was revolutionary in 1997 and is now standard practice. Puerto Rico and mainland United States improved integration of vital statistics to prevent fraudulent documentation. Greater attention was paid to how children can be moved between U.S. territories without triggering alerts. The case is studied in FBI training for cold case breakthroughs in Interpol courses on international child abduction and forensic identification when age progression is difficult, demonstrating the value of distinctive physical markers like birthmarks and smiles. The NCMEC database model that found Crystal has since reunited hundreds of missing children with families. What this case teaches is clear. Persistence matters. Sergeant Munsterman never closed the file. Details matter. A tiny birthmark and a distinctive smile made all the difference. Technology evolves. What was impossible in 1990 became possible by 1997. Hope is rational. 7 years is not too long. Recovery is complex. Finding someone doesn't mean bringing them home. For those of us watching from the outside, this story offers practical lessons. Trust your instincts. Marshall Chamblin's abuse complaint accidentally saved Crystal. If something feels wrong about a child's situation, report it. You're not being nosy. You might be saving a life. Know the resources. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children operates a hotline. Report suspicious activity involving children. Seeing something and saying something applies to children especially. Document everything. Photos of your grandchildren with distinctive features noted matter. Keep records updated. In 1990, that birthmark notation saved Crystal. Support doesn't mean pity. Recovered victims need privacy more than attention. Don't ask invasive questions. Crystal's healing required peace and silence. Respect that for others. Take the long view on justice. Recovery can happen years later. Never assume a case is too old. Advocacy and awareness keep cases alive. On December 8, 1990, in a 30-minute window that changed everything, Jeffrey Anzaldi pulled a blanket over his sleeping daughter and lost her for 7 years. But because he never stopped hoping, because a detective never closed a file, because a social worker checked a birth certificate, because an agent recognized a smile in a database photo, Crystal Leanne Anzaldi came home. Not the baby who was taken, but the young woman she became, despite everything. The 30 minutes that stole her childhood couldn't steal her future. And in the end, that might be the closest thing to justice we can find. Crystal living the ordinary art-filled, quiet life she chooses finally and completely her own. If this story stayed with you, we'd love to know what you took from it. And if you want to keep these names remembered, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps these stories keep being told.